Welcome to another episode of the Scottish Property Podcast. My name's Nick Ponte. I'm here by myself today. No Stephen Clark. He's missing in action. I'm sure you'll see what he's up to on his Instagram stories. But I'm delighted to be joined by a guest called Charlie Innes from Glenham Property. Charlie's got 27 years experience in the private rented sector as a landlord and a letting agent. We talk about in great detail the latest proposed changes by the Scottish Government to the private rented sector and the introduction of this new deal for tenants and their 2040 housing strategy. There's a lot to unpack in that document, and there's over 100 pages in the consultation, which is available to give feedback until the end of April, I think, 2022. But anyway, what we'll do is we'll cut to the interview with Charlie because it's quite a long one. We really go into a lot of technical sort of stuff to do with tenancies and this whole kind of change that we're going through at the moment. And, you know, so many people saying buy to let is dead. But as myself and Charlie unpick, you know, we can certainly be a solution to the housing shortage as private landlords. And I think there's a lot of positives that we can take away from these changes as well. So hope you enjoy the interview with Charlie Innes. So I'm delighted to welcome Charlie Innes to the Scottish Property Podcast today. Charlie, how are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you, Nick, and yourself.
Excellent, thanks. So brought Charlie on here today because you have a wealth of experience in the Scottish private rented sector. Charlie, tell us a little bit about, you know, how long you've been doing this game and, you know, what's got you into property and what you're doing now.
So I've been involved in the property business game for probably nearly 27 years now. I actually kind of almost fell into it by accident. I had a friend of mine that was running a letting agency in Edinburgh many years ago, and I sort of kind of went for a job interview sort of in the pub. And I think I got offered the job that night, but to be honest with you, my memory is very sketchy. And started off right at the bottom of the pile, if you like, as a lettings negotiator, as it was known in those days, effectively showing people around properties, and worked my way up to lettings manager, running the business, essentially running the business, and then sort of moved into more investment side. I was always heavily involved in the investment side of things as well. I think we were certainly instrumental in potentially setting up the first investment consultancy service in Scotland on the back of buy-to-let when it first appeared in the sort of kind of late 90s. And as a result, was always heavily involved in the investment side as well. I now currently am the new business manager and investment manager at Glenham Property in Edinburgh. Primarily, we are a property investment and management company. So we manage a portfolio of a large portfolio of properties in Edinburgh, but we also offer our clients a full sort of search, acquisition and investment service as well. So in terms of what our client base is, they tend to be investor clients, maybe for want of a better word, HNWs, although it's not a term I particularly like. And yeah, we offer a sort of turnkey service. So anyone that's wanting to access the residential investment market, we can help them from start to finish, primarily.
Excellent. What does HNW stand for, sorry?
High net worth.
Ah, right. Okay, excellent. And when
it's a term that you see bandied around on the internet an awful lot. Apparently, there are lots and lots of people working with high net worth individuals. Or, you know, if you want to go higher than that, you go to UHNW, which is ultra high net worth.
Right.
I've always had a problem with that, because what does that actually mean? You know, are you a high net worth individual, Nick? Am I? I don't know. You know?
Exactly. I'm going to get you going even further here. When you say investment consultancy, is that a fancy term for sourcing?
So you and I had a brief joke about this on the net the other day. I don't just source deals for clients. I actually go and what I offer a full investment service. So that doesn't mean to say I just look on Rightmove and try and package up a deal, or I get an off-market deal. I'm doing significant levels of due diligence on any potential investment for a client, and we actually provide a full investment analysis report, breakdown projections for our clients. We run our any investment through a fairly sophisticated analysis tool, and into that we build all sorts of variables. So everything from the costs associated with purchase, and that might include ADS, LBTT, the costs of finance, but we also build into our pictures costs associated with running any potential investment. Importantly, obviously, finance, void times, safety certification, maintenance costs, management fees, blah, blah, blah. And we also probably build in an element of capital uplift to come out with an ROI figure. And most of our investment terms tend to be based on a 10-year hold term as well. So I would suggest we do a significantly higher level of work. And the aim for our clients is to source investment opportunities for them that give them the best possible return, but also significantly important is risk mitigation. So it's all part of the same thing for me. But yeah, it's not just saying, here, Mr. Landlord, here's a flat. I like it because it's got a nice colored front door. Most of my clients want me to go into significant detail and break it down for them to provide them with a reason as to potentially why they might want to invest. So that's why I kind of say consultancy, because it isn't just about turning up with a deal and charging someone $3,000 to say, there you are, I've got a deal. We take a significant amount of time and effort to make sure that the deal stacks up, and we try and seek to mitigate our clients' risk.
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the reasons I brought you on today, Charlie, is because obviously we are experiencing huge change at the moment, I feel, in the private rented sector. I mean, we have done now for a number of, a few years. I mean, there's been a lot happening in the 27 years that you've been involved in this. Let's just have a look back and see, how has it changed since you first started?
Well, I mean, when I first started in the business, it was just after the 88 Housing Act, Scotland, when they brought in assured tenancy. And, there was a lot of talk even at that point that this was going to have, significant impacts and it was all going to be dreadful, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, to be honest, it worked. We all know that the assured tenancy agreement had its problems. And there was a lot of stuff in there that as a private landlord, you could get yourself into quite a lot of trouble. Various documents had to be served correctly, et cetera, et cetera. But that aside, what else have we seen? Increased levels of safety certification requirement. That's a good thing. I've never had a problem with that. HMO regulation. I remember when that first came in, it was all this talk about it was going to ruin the student market. It didn't. It professionalized it, and I think it certainly improved standards and safety standards across the board in student accommodation. What else have we seen? Well, obviously the PRT. Again, I remember going to many presentations with people basically telling me I was going to lose the shirt off my back. It was all dreadful. The skies were going to fall in, and it was going to result in the market being decimated. I remember going to these and going, do you know what? This isn't kind of what I'm feeling myself. And it isn't necessarily what I want to hear from professionals like yourselves. Surely what we should be doing is working to try and mitigate our clients' risk and our own risk and seeing how we can work with this. So I never really had a problem with the PRT. And, certainly the end of the no fault ground was another one, But I think this current next set of changes are really significant. And some of the stuff that's being discussed, I think, are going to have far-reaching impact on how the private residential sector works, probably more so than any other that we've seen potentially.
Well, let's just bring ourselves on to the kind of latest thing then. So, I'm not an expert in this political stuff, but correct me if I'm wrong. I just pick up bits and pieces of news, and obviously we're members of Scottish Association of Landlords who keep us updated and all the rest of it. But
we're members of ARLA as well, so we get some feedback from them as well. But I think one of the things to say, I think, Nick, is that this is very early stages here, and I think there's probably a lot of people out. Firstly, I think there's a lot of people out there that have absolutely no idea about this. I've been banging the drum about this, the 2040 document, the New Deal for tenants. If you're a landlord and you haven't spent some time looking at this, you really need to. it's great sticking your head in the sand, but these things are coming down the tracks. And whatever happens, there are going to be changes. So I do feel that people should educate themselves. They should really read it all, if I'm being honest, and they should take part in the process. In other words, take part in the consultation and respond to it. And I urge anyone listening to this to do it, because if you don't, then what comes down the tracks, you've really got no excuse.
Yeah, and this consultation that we're talking about, this is called the New Deal for Tenants. It's open for submissions until I think April 2022, I think.
Yeah, it's I think it's the 14th of April this year. I think is it 14th of April this year. Yeah,
it's a big old document. It's over 100 pages long, and we're going to try and skim the surface today, just talk about the main points.
Yeah, but, I mean, I think it's like anything. Again, you need to sit and read it and then probably go back to it. I mean, I've got copious notes here about it. I've taken, but I'm still scratching the surface. So I would suggest that there is a bit of a caveat here. Obviously, this is a personal view. And you and I's personal view on this, and I do urge again that people do need to go into this themselves and have a look. We're just talking about things in general here, potentially.
Yeah, and what's interesting is it's open to all. I mean, it's the private rented sector. It's also social housing as well. It covers everything. They want feedback from tenants. They want feedback from landlords. So this is why we're sort of urging people to. This is your chance to kind of give your opinion. And a lot of these questions, they're basically just looking to find the best way of doing things. I mean, obviously there'll be some sort of political agenda at play and all the rest of it, but we've just got to give our feedback as landlords, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And there is a tendency potentially for us to say, the political agenda is behind the scenes here, and whatever happens, I suppose the best way of putting this is it is very easy to portray landlords in a fairly unpleasant light as sort of kind of money-grabbing, capitalistic, uncaring individuals who would kick their tenants out with a baseball bat. Now, you and I both know that is a sweeping generalization, and there are bad landlords as well as good landlords. There are bad tenants as well as good tenants. I think the issue that we have here is that the direction of travel to a degree has moved from probably favouring landlords overly, and I think there is an argument to say that the early legislation definitely did, there's no doubt about that, to a situation where it's now favouring tenants potentially overly. And, there is a wider question to be asked. Is that a vote winner? Are landlords seen as fairly low-hanging fruit here? And knocking landlords in the private rented sector to a degree is a good way of our political masters being seen to be very popular. I suppose the flip side of that, Nick, is that the private rented sector, I believe, now houses nearly 22% of the population in Scotland in some areas. It's hardly surprising that government is looking closely at it. We really have to accept the fact that this is going to happen. If we are responsibility as a sector to house that many people, then clearly there is a requirement for legislation and regulation. I've never had a problem with that.
Yeah, one of the things that really gets me is, like, you see it quite a lot in Facebook groups and all that. Oh, the landlords are the victims and all the rest of it. Why are they doing this? Buy to let's dead. Everything's in the tenant's favour. Right? Okay, but at the end of the day, right, they've kind of made this now with all the kind of introductions with Section 24 tax and all the rest of it. They've kind of made it now so that it really doesn't work for somebody who has like one or two buy-to-lets. Really, you have to go into this with a professional view and running it as a business, right? And just like any other business, things are going to change. Legislation is going to change. I just feel there needs to be more positivity amongst us landlords and just realize that, this actually might be a good thing. So
yeah, I fundamentally agree with you on that, Nick. I mean, I think, one of the things that one of the stated aims is they want to improve professionalism. They want to improve the quality, essentially, of the housing we provide. Now, for me personally, as an investor, I don't believe that improving the quality of my stock and generating a return from my investment it's not mutually exclusive. It is a possibility to do this. And for me, I run it like a business. I set up every year a potential list of improvements that I want to do to my property. So for example, in 2 of my flats at the moment, I'm replacing all the windows with double glazed units. I accept that. I don't have a problem with that. I think that is part of what I do. And I build that into my investment analysis model, an acceptance of capital expenditure. If there's a lifespan for a kitchen, there's a lifespan for a boiler. So, and I see a lot of this talk in landlord focused groups about, oh, it's all dreadful, we're going to have to spend all this money. Well, I don't have a problem with it. I'm very proud to provide my tenants with good quality, warm homes. I don't have a problem with that, and I build it into my model. So I know that I'm going to have an element of CapEx every year, and I build that into our projections and our budgets. Any landlord worth their salt really should be doing the same thing. And not only do we have a legal responsibility, but I feel we have a moral responsibility here. We're providing people with homes. Be proud of the homes that you provide, and you should really be able to live in any of your rented accommodation yourself. If you can't do that and you're not willing, you're not in the right business.
What I find just quite interesting is I feel like there is already provisions set up, but they want to take it steps further. So like, obviously, if you're a tenant at the moment, and probably not a lot of tenants know this, to be honest with you, but if you're not happy with something, or their repair's not getting done, then you can just like report your landlords to the tribunal, right? Already. And I think that they really, I don't know how it's all going to pan out, whether, like there'll be some sort of like council inspector or something like that coming around before you get your registration or something like that. I don't know. I mean, we don't really know. This is what's the bottom line.
This is the point. But I do agree with you as well on that point. I think, I think the current legislation, I believe, is fit for purpose to a degree here. I think part of the problem is the policing element of this. It's all well and good bringing in further legislation, because we know the good landlords they're going to sign up to this. Of course they will. To me, part of the problem here is, what about those guys that don't? The cowboy element, if you like. And property investment and investing into property is open to all sorts of people who can just take advantage. We know it is. And one of the things that I have slight issues with, and I'm not knocking every single people out there flogging courses, but it's also seen as a way, people buy these courses, it's seen as a way of turbocharging your income, or maximizing your income, or all of these type of terms, rent to rent, whatever it might be, all these kind of esoteric strategies that are taught are bringing more and more people into this sector who actually really have absolutely no idea. These courses don't teach you how to be a landlord. They give you a basic idea, but very few of them actually go into the legalities of how to serve a private residential tenancy. How do you serve notice on your tenant? What are your legal responsibilities in terms of the repairing standards? You name it. These courses don't do that. So we're getting lots and lots of people into this game who are probably investing maybe unwisely, but also with very little knowledge about how to actually do this. I've also argued for quite a long time, and this is my letting agency hat on here. Letting agents, you and I now, are regulated heavily by Scottish government. It's something I've been banging the drum for a very, very long period of time, and I think it's a good thing. But it requires you and I to have certain things in place: minimum standards of training, client money protection, insurance, etc., etc. However, as a DIY landlord, you don't need any of that. You could own 12 properties and have no idea what you're doing as a landlord. And I see it all the time. So for me, it's a two-tier system. And if they're talking about professionalizing the industry, I'm afraid I feel that there should be some form of accreditation system for DIY landlords as well. It might be unpopular out there, but for us, we spend a significant amount of time and money ensuring our clients. Now, okay, the argument is, of course, is that we manage more properties than an individual landlord. I don't, that argument doesn't work for me, because an individual landlord is still letting a property to a person living in it. The responsibility is the same under the law. So they should be fully able to do that.
Yeah, and what you said there, about that, I've met tenants recently who are still getting issued with short assured tenancy agreements, and they've been in since, the PRT, private residential tenancy, has been in since December 2017, so over 4 years now. Do you know what I mean?
I was at a landlord event about a couple of years ago, just pre-COVID, and I will remain nameless where it was and who was involved, but there was a room full of landlords in there, and the person who was hosting the said event was talking about PRTs, and two people put their hands up and asked what a PRT was.
Yeah,
I was flabbergasted. I'm sitting there, and you're renting properties and you don't understand what a private residential tenancy is. Really?
Yeah, and obviously people will be listening to this and be like, well, they would say that, they're letting agents, but no, it's a really good point. Do you know what I mean? But
just to make that clear, I've got absolutely no problem people doing managing the properties themselves. Of course, that's as their right, no issues with that. Yeah. But if you are going to manage your properties yourself, this comes back to what I said earlier. Be aware of all this stuff coming down the tracks. Understand the legal framework for managing and renting property in Scotland. If you don't, then you must educate yourself. And Landlord Accreditation Scotland do offer courses, and I strongly advise people to sign up to that. It's a great thing to do. I did it as a landlord myself, and I think it was brilliant. I think it's the courses they offer are excellent, and I think people should embrace that.
Yeah. So I think what's quite refreshing to me is most of the landlords that come to me, like you said before, are really proud of the standard of the properties that they're offering to let. A lot of them have been like fully refurbed and all the rest of it. So, is that kind of minority, I would say, that kind of brings the sector down.
I agree.
We've covered that kind of like, repairing standard thing, bringing properties up to scratch and maintaining that level for tenants. So what else does this document kind of set out to kind of gather information on then? What other topics is there to talk about?
So, one of the things they're talking about here are grounds for repossession. And I don't know if you guys have seen the Coronavirus Recovery and Reform Bill legislation that's about to come in or has come in. Effectively, that means to say that all grounds for repossession in Scotland will be discretionary. The mandatory grounds for repossession will really basically no longer exist. So essentially that means the tribunal, first tier tribunal, can look at every single repossession order and apply discretionary views on that. Now, that doesn't mean to say that every time someone seeks to terminate a tenancy, it's going to go to first tier tribunal. It's not. But if a tenant decides to contest that, whichever ground it is, 1 to 18 or whatever they are, the mandatory grounds will, I'm selling my property. That was a mandatory ground for repossession. In theory, what can happen is first tier tribunal can look at that and they'll say, right, okay, well, in this particular instance, we are not going to grant grounds for repossession. We're not going to give you vacant possession. So that is a big change, and that's one that was discussed within the document, but it's already there, basically. So again, what are the potential risks there to you and I as a landlord? Well, the first thing is to make sure that if you are going to be terminating a tenancy, you do it properly. And things like, for example, if there's a rent arrears, you have to apply, the pre-adjudication. I can't remember.
Advice, pre-auth. I can't remember the name of it.
I've got it written down somewhere. But yeah, in simple terms, you've got to make sure that however you go about serving notice, you do it correctly.
Basically, there's like 4 letters that you have to put out if you're evicting a tenant on the grounds of rent arrears. There's advice that you have to give.
Exactly. You have to engage with the tenants. You have to have shown that you've tried to sort out the issues, etc., all of those things. And it needs to be done correctly. And if you haven't done that correctly, it's going to get chucked out anyway. But even if you have, essentially, the first tier tribunal have a right to turn around and say, well, actually, we're not going to allow this. And that kind of brings us neatly onto this view also about potentially evictions over winter. They're talking about trying to prevent or make it more difficult for people to be evicted from their houses over winter because of various different reasons. It's potentially harder to find somewhere over winter, all of these different things. And there are different ways that they're looking at applying that. Essentially, you might not be able to serve an eviction notice or a notice to, seek vacant possession during the winter months. And again, I'm not going to go into all the detail here. I mean, I've got lists of the reasons for it in my notes here, but essentially, guys, go and have a look. But that's one of the things that potentially they're talking about bringing in.
I just feel with this stuff, like a lot of it is like, as long as you have done everything by the book and you've got all your procedures, and this is where it gets complicated. This is where things, the days of being a self-managing landlord are going to be very difficult, because for you to keep up to speed with all this stuff, it's going to be really hard. I mean, like, this is what we do full time, day in, day out. So we're up to, although we've just forgotten the term for the language. Do you know what I mean? But
in our defence, there is so much information in this. I mean, it's 180 pages long or whatever.
Yeah.
It's full of stuff, and But yes, again, it's really important. The reforms to repossession is significant. Now, the flip side of that is, how worried am I as a landlord about that? If I'm being honest with you, I'm not overly concerned, because I would hope that common sense applies. Okay, in inverted commas. So if there is a reason for me to evict my tenant, I'm selling my own home, I want to exit the market. As long as I do it correctly and I provide the correct information, and if I'm required to provide proof of the fact that I'm planning to sell my home, I'd love to know how that works, but maybe a letter of engagement for a solicitor.
Yeah.
In theory, hopefully, it shouldn't be a massive issue. And most of the time, Nick, you and I, we know that as long as we apply the law correctly and we terminate a tenancy in the correct way, it's not like we're being taken to first tier tribunal every time we do this. It's certainly not the case.
Most of the tenants will, accept it and leave and move on. Obviously, there are ones that will dig their heels, and obviously that's where the legal process sort of kicks in more.
I would argue as well that if you as a landlord haven't carried out your responsibilities correctly, you are more likely to have resistance from a tenant than you would do if you had.
Yeah.
So, there is an argument to say, good landlords and good tenants, the relationship is absolutely fine. We in normal circumstance, and I see lots and lots of stuff on various Facebook pages about how awful it is for the fact that they're not being able to eject their tenants. And we all know the horror stories, don't get me wrong. But what I do say to people is, those horror stories are a very small minority. The number of tenancies that are going on in the UK, in Scotland at the moment, is significant. And if you actually analyze that versus the number of ones that cause problems or are contentious, it's a very small number here. So I think there is a tendency to overplay the bad element of it and underplay the good tenancies that go on. And I've had my bad tenancies over the year, but very, very few in comparison to the number of good tenancies I've had.
Yeah.
And also, you know yourself, there is a value to holding on to a good tenant.
And let's just talk about, let's face it, no landlord wants to go through having to evict a tenant. It's just something that we don't want to do, like, we will try absolutely everything and find solutions before we have to go down that route.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, and this view that all landlords are going to increase their rents all of the time, again, we know that that's not true. When I look at my rents, I know I've got, my portfolio is split sort of kind of, I'm very heavily involved in the student element of it. I've got a number of HMO flats, but I've also recently just invested in 3 smaller 1 and 2 bed properties. And the tenants in those ones, I bought 2 of them with tenants in situ. They're long-term tenants. Am I at market rent? I'm probably a little bit below, but I'm comfortable with that. The tenants are great. I've had no problems with them. We get on really well with them, in fact, and the tenancies are progressing absolutely no problem at all. What's actually interesting is to come into the student market, actually, because I would imagine there are some people out there who have got HMO properties. And what was interesting in the document is it was noted the differential between PBSA, and for those people that don't know, that is purpose-built student accommodation, versus standard HMO tenancies. And when I say that, the majority of my flats are let on joint and several tenancies. They're not let room by room. They're let to a group of friends who are sharing a flat. The PBSAs are able to, I'm not going to use the word inflict, have a requirement for tenants to stay in a tenancy for a certain length of time. We as normal landlords under the private rented sector and the PRT don't have that. A tenant can serve notice, giving 28 days notice at any point. So there is a fundamental imbalance there, and that has been noted. And actually, I'm quite interested in that. I don't see why, as a large PBSA, you should have different laws than, or the tenants renting under those with those organisations should have different laws to the ones renting in the private rented sector. So they're talking about trying to bring the PBSA sector more in line with the PRS. And actually, I personally think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, that's interesting. Getting back to that, obviously, the introduction of the PRT and that, and say a lot of people with student HMOs and that were kind of like panicking, especially like you guys in Edinburgh had this kind of like quite unique model with the festival as well. So with that whole thing, how it's panned out, has that left you with increased like void periods and stuff like that? I don't know.
Shall we take coronavirus out of the equation here? We could have a whole podcast on what coronavirus and what the impact on the private rented sector, specifically students, was. Yeah. Let's not go there. In normal times, I haven't actually had a massive problem with it. I think there was a lot of talk about the fact, because you couldn't serve notice on a tenant using a no-fault ground, you weren't going to be able to use your tenancies during the summer months while the festival is on. Now, personally, I don't do that on my HMO flat in Edinburgh. I don't do that at all. It's never. I've done it once, and it was an absolute nightmare. I'm never going to do it again. We, as a business, did have one or two landlords that did kind of used to do it, but the majority have taken a view and said, do you know what? Firstly, with all the stuff that's coming down the tracks about short-term rental, and let's not go there because that's a whole can of worms. And most of my clients now take the view that they will just continue long-term tenancies. The way that we operate that essentially is next month, we will write to all of our tenants, asking them what they're going to do. By the nature of the PRT, all the tenants have to notice or have to note on the letter of leaving or whatever that they are leaving. We will get a date from them, hopefully, that they're all going to leave, and an agreement that they will be out of the property by that date. And we will then market the property with a week after that as a start date of the tenancy. On the whole, that has worked okay. Obviously, there have been some teething issues with it, but I don't think fundamentally it's had that much of an impact. Funnily enough, it is mentioned in this new deal for tenants. Some landlords have said that it's reduced their income levels. I personally don't subscribe to, I don't subscribe to the short-term let model for my HMO flat. So for me personally, it hasn't affected them. I'm sure it may have done some, but in simple terms, Nick, I think it works okay.
Interesting. Okay, so we've talked about obviously changes to the notice periods and stuff like that, you know, potentially that this kind of 6 months for rent arrears and things, that's possibly a bit scary as well, because like, you know, if you're having to serve a 6 months notice to leave for rent arrears, potentially if you have a tenant who just decides not to pay rent, you could be up to a year without any rent coming in before you actually get an eviction order from the tribunal, which is a long time.
It is. And I think there lies one of the problems. And it is highlighted again in the documents that landlords have raised, that, you know, they're not that impressed with the way that the process works. And there is an acceptance of that within the documentation. And I think they are looking at that to see how it works. I think the problem here is that effectively they're trying to balance increasing levels of security of tenure for tenants in all circumstances, not just normal circumstances, but for those tenants that are also in rent arrears or whatever. The areas where they're very clear is antisocial behavior and criminal activity. Gone.
Yeah.
But in all other cases, they are trying to put in place circumstances or mechanisms to provide a greater degree of security of tenure.
Mm-hmm.
Are the two possible? Legislation can be a very, very blunt tool. And however hard you try, there are always going to be things that fall through the cracks. And this is one area that I think is problematic. There is also ways potentially of tenants playing the system. Yeah. They only need to be 3 months in, or they have to be 3 months in arrears. Well, they come to a point where they're almost getting to a point of eviction, then they pay back some of the rent. Mm. There are problems there. And again, luckily enough, well, I'm not a politician. I would hope that in this consultation process, these type of things are examined at committee level and all of the rest of it. And again, this is why we really need to get people to engage in this, because the more information that we provide, and we know that Sal and Arla are doing this, but it's the grassroots level here. It's the DIY landlords. It's the guys out there, all of us. Please respond.
Yeah, let's get on to rent controls then.
Oh my God.
Let's just get I mean,
I have to say, this is the area I'm a little bit sketchy about. So yeah, carry on anyway.
No, that's fine. Listen, at the end of the day, we've not really had a chance to consume all this stuff. Everybody needs to go and do their own research and do their own reading. Myself and Charlie have just come on here today for a chat. It's one of the issues that we can talk about in general, and it's one of the issues that comes up in the consultation paper, and there's quite a few questions regarding that. But let's just talk about it in general. Is there a need for rent controls?
You notice that I don't turn around straight away and say no, because we do know that there are affordability issues. And for a market to work, ultimately, you've got to have people that are going to rent. And if you haven't got people that can afford to rent, then you haven't got a market to a degree, in my mind. The flip side of that is I mean, should we rely on market forces? And an example of that is recently what happened in Edinburgh with the COVID side of things. We had a situation where there was an oversupply of stock post lockdown 1, which was brought in primarily because of the very large percentage of short-term rental stock that was dumped onto the PRS. What happened? Rents dropped for the first time in Edinburgh for 10 years across the board. There was more stock out there. That tenants had more flexibility. There was less competition. That to me is a good thing. I don't have a problem with that. And this goes back to the fact that I like to improve my properties. I want my properties to be best in class. That means to say I'm attracting good tenants. I'm minimizing my void times. I'm investing into my asset. So, market forces, some of this legislation will result, I think, in some landlords exiting the market. So they fundamentally state that they want to increase availability of stock. They want to increase affordability. They want to increase investment into the market. Well, a lot of landlords are going to look at all of this and go, well, why should I? Mm-hmm. All this stuff coming down the tracks, why should I do that? Effectively what you are doing is you are increasing my risk. So am I going to exit? And, are we seeing evidence of that already? We've now got to the point in Edinburgh, and I'm sure in Glasgow as well, where we've gone from one extreme to the other. There is now a significant undersupply of stock.
Yeah, can I just pause you on that? Just talking about the markets there. I'm just like, I pulled up the Glasgow Q4 City Lets report. The price of a 1-bedroom flat, the average rent is now £738 a month, and it's increased 14.6% over the year. That is, I mean, it's ridiculous. If you go into a 3-bed house, it's increased 31% over the year. That can't sustain, right?
That to me, that is unsustainable. And, does that then mean that we bring in artificial controls to the market to somehow cap rent? And what I find interesting in this is that they're talking about, and I made a note of this, it needs to be affordable in proportion to people's average income. How is that going to happen?
Yeah.
What is the definition of affordability versus unaffordability? And effectively what we're doing here is that question is being answered by Holyrood. Now, anyone would hate the idea of artificial controls of market. My feeling is, genuinely, I think this is going to happen. I'm afraid. I can't see any reason, any way that we're not going to get some form of artificial rent cap. To be honest, it's already there in the legislation, but it's just so clunky that no one's actually been able to do it.
Well, they don't have the data either, really. They don't have they don't really have a handle on this in terms of, what is the correct level of rent or the average rent. Do you know what I mean?
And you and I both know that there is going to be a requirement on them, or they're talking about, being able to mine that data. So where is that going to come from? Firstly, I would imagine there will be a responsibility on letting agents to report rents back to government somehow or another. I also think, my friend Thomas Ashtown, who runs City Lets, I'm pretty sure, I don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure he's had conversations with Scottish Government about this. I'm sure Alex Watts at Lettingweb probably has, Rightmove, Zoopla, whatever. These guys have got fairly good data to provide proof of what rents are. And, as you say, the City Lets report, which I think, by the way, everyone, is a fantastic publication. And if you're a private landlord, you should be reading that, because it's a really useful source of information. But yeah, how are they going to firstly monitor rents? And that's going to come in. And then how are they going to set these things? And those are the big questions.
Yeah, I think it was the Green Party said the 25% of income, wasn't it? That rent shouldn't be more than 25% of income.
Yeah. I mean, and this is a really interesting question then. So say, Nick, for example, I'm just left university. I've got my first job. I'm earning 20 grand a year or something, but I decide I want to go and live in a 4-bed flat in a new town. And I say to my landlord, well, Mr. Landlord, I love this house. It's brilliant. And I would like to live here. But you can only charge me 25% of my income. Fantastic. Now, that's a sweeping conversation piece, but it made me that I did actually think about that. How are they going to, presumably they must be able to stop people applying for properties that are effectively unaffordable. But how are they going to set that? Could they not turn around and say, well, Mr. Landlord, who owns a 4-bedroom flat in the new town on Heriot Road, top best address in Edinburgh, whatever, you are going to have a rent of this amount. These are the big questions about it.
And then it comes down to, well, how can you justify, you might have one property in that same area, like 2 properties next door to each other. One could have not been updated for 20 years. The other one could be like a brand new kitchen, bathroom. The landlord could have spent 20 grand doing it up. Do you know what I mean? So surely you're going to, it's obvious that somebody's going to pay more for the property that's all done up. Do you know what I mean? So,
well, you would think so, wouldn't you? And does that mean to say that there's going to be a sort of set standard across the board, just done by postcode? But within that, yourself, within a street, you can have 4 or 5 properties at different rents because of the quality of the property inside. Now, again, we've already discussed that the aim is to improve quality across the board. But how are they going to do that? And is there a minimum requirement? Everyone's going to have to put in Howden level kitchens, or you're going to have to go and buy Pog and Pole kitchens. And I don't know. What is the minimum standard? We know what the repairing standards are, and the property has to be fit for human habitation, provision of sanitation, hot and cold running water, etc. But yeah, artificial control of markets, to me, is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
I'm naturally, I suppose, a capitalist. However, I accept that there are problems out there. And I do feel that, constant rising rents is not a good thing. It's not a good thing for anyone, because actually the market will become unsustainable.
Yeah.
So, but can we rely on market forces to maintain that? Now, to me, surely we should be encouraging more investment into the market. Getting more people to invest in the market means that there's more availability of stock, which means by its very nature, supply and demand, hopefully that would result in a potential reduction in rent. And we've seen it happen. The problem is, I think by doing what they're doing, it's going to put people off as well. So I can't see how they can balance the two at the moment.
Yeah. And pretty much it just comes down to like supply and demand, and there is just not enough there's just not enough rented accommodation out there for people, basically. We're seeing it in Glasgow still. I thought after, before Christmas and that, demand was crazy. I thought it was going to tail off a little bit after New Year, and still, I'm putting on, a 2-bedroom flat in the East End of Glasgow and Denniston at £950, which is arguably probably £100 over what it was like last year. And we're still getting huge number of inquiries, huge number of viewers. So that just doesn't seem to be going away. We had a situation, we put a 1-bedroom flat on a property in the East End of Edinburgh, sort of Abbey Hill way. And we put it on at £850 a month, which I thought was punchy. And someone came and offered us £950 just to take the property off the market. Yeah. I have an issue with that in a way. I'm uncomfortable with that because, what happens in those circumstances is people that can afford it. And, there is a problem with affordability. I accept it. But artificial control, is that the way forward? I think it's going to happen. I do think it's going to happen. Whether I agree with it, of course, is a different thing. I suppose the flip side is, am I going to sell all my properties tomorrow, Nick? No, I don't think I am. I'm in this for the long game. And, I've seen, as we discussed right at the start of this, I've seen so many changes come down the tracks that, and every single one of them was going to be the end of the world. Section 24 was another one. And landlords, I suppose, might feel that they're a bit punch drunk at the moment. But am I going to exit? No, I'm not. Am I going to buy? I might well do. So I try to be a glass half full kind of guy. I would like the private rent sector and landlords to be seen as part of the solution rather than the enemy. Good point. Yeah. Good point. It's interesting getting back to where you said, you felt a bit uncomfortable at these high rents. I do too, actually. It's really something that you go through your mind. And, are we actually making the problem worse? But as a letting agent managing the landlord's property, surely I have an obligation to give them the market rent, put it on it at the market rent. And if I've got 10 people who are wanting to take that property on the first viewing, then surely that is the market rent. Actually, you could argue that it's undervalued because there's 10 people after it.
As a letting agency, our job is to manage our client's asset.
Yeah.
And, majority of these places are assets. 1 or 2 of our clients, it's their own home and they've moved away and they're coming back. But, and any investor, it is an asset. We're in this as to make a return. But as I said, I don't believe making a return from property is impossible without, at the same time as providing good quality homes. I genuinely believe, and I'm sure Susan White-Actimel at Homes for Good would agree with that. And I think her model is a really interesting, and I hugely respect, and I liked her chat previous to this. I said she's going to be a hard act to follow, and I do believe that you can do those two things. More inward investment would open up the market, Nick, wouldn't it? Is this legislation going to put people off? I mean,
then the government don't want to do that, because they obviously, that's, if we're attracting property investors in, then potentially we're competing against, first-time buyers and all the rest of it. So then they've got that whole argument to deal with, haven't they? Like, we're taking the properties away from the first-time buyers. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the flip side of that is, does every person who lives, this view that everyone lives in the private rented sector kind of basically they don't want to, it's almost they have to. I've got many tenants who choose to live in the private rent sector for various different reasons, but it's not just a tenure of being forced into it. It is a tenure of choice for many people. But there again, there is this view that every tenant in who's renting doesn't want to rent. Well, that's not true. Yeah. It clearly isn't true. Students don't want to necessarily go and buy a house. I mean, and I do agree that there is also an imbalance between affordability and being able to buy. That said, I don't think it's quite as bad as everyone would say. I mean, you and I both know that you can buy property for, particularly in Scotland, for not huge sums of money. And it's not unobtainable. Maybe I'm being a bit outrageous here, but when I first bought my first ever flat, did I choose to live in a penthouse flat in the middle of Edinburgh? No, I didn't, because I couldn't afford it. I lived somewhere else that I could afford, and I built up. But that's just my personal view. And I do believe that fundamentally we know there is an affordability issue here. How we go about solving that is a really interesting, and this is part of what this document is trying to achieve. And the rent control element. I mean, the other issue, of course, is that there is a significant lack of social housing. The numbers of social housing dropped dramatically. Right to buy didn't help, obviously, but councils weren't building. Now, to be fair, Scottish government, they are. But my question would be, if this legislation comes in and the effect is that there's a large percentage of landlords that exit the market, and not this idea that somehow all of these landlords are going to leave and the price of property will drop as a result, which I think is sort of kind of potentially what some of our political leaders are thinking. I don't see that happening. I mean, the demand levels outstrip supply in the purchase market as well. I'm not expecting all of a sudden there to be a massive dump of property onto the market and property values to drop, so therefore people who are renting could buy. I don't think that's going to happen. So where are these people going to live? That would be my question to the politicians. Tell me, where are they going to live?
Yeah, it's interesting. I saw one solution which I thought was maybe not too scary and would maybe work okay, was this idea of having only, well, at the moment you're only allowed to raise the rents one time per year anyway, right? The PRT. Having one increase per year, but you aren't allowed to raise it any higher than CPI, Consumer Price Index, plus 1%.
Yeah, that's kind of the current legislation, isn't it? They're talking about linking it to CPI or RPI. That was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was contained within the current legislation. I mean, but that in itself is an inbuilt automatic rent increase, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing, right? So if they start really imposing this stuff, I mean, I've got actually a tenant in a flat it's been there 5 years now, one of my own properties that I own myself. And obviously every landlord's different. And I have conversations with each one of our landlords to see if they want to increase the rent or not. Everybody's got a different take on it. Me personally, if I've got a tenant in there that's been in there for 5 years, I've been reluctant to increase the rent. If I'm honest, I haven't raised that rent for 5 years. I mean, now I'm looking at it thinking, whoa, it's like hugely under the market rate. But I'm thinking to myself, I would probably have to spend probably £2,000 or £3,000 in that property, redecorating it, might have a slight void period as well. They're happy there. They really want to disrupt that tenant. But now, if they really impose this stuff, I'm going to be like, hell yeah, I'm increasing that rent every year because they've imposed this on us. So like, I'm going to take that rent increase every year. So
I would agree with you. I think, there are probably landlords out there thinking, well, I've been letting this go because I like my tenants, and I there is inherent value having a good tenant that's staying in the property. I'm willing to maybe accept the fact that rents are a little bit on the low side. But hang on, well, there's some stuff coming down here which is not great. So therefore, what am I going to do? I'm actually going to seek to raise my rent. And again, in the legislation, they were talking about rent officers. At the moment, there is apparently tenants have a problem applying for a rent or contesting a rent increase, I should say, because the rent officer might look at market rent and actually turn around and say, well, the rent increase that the landlords propose is not market. So actually, this is the market rent. So the rent's going to go up to market rent. And they're now talking about bringing in legislation that would say that they would have to apply the landlord's suggested increase or less. So, again, how are they going to do this?
And the other thing is CPI is at 5.4% and it's set to go up to 7%. So we're in high inflation time. So that could well backfire as well.
And you know what? But then again, we get back into the whole, this is why all these arguments are circular. They're all in, it's all part of the same thing. The price of living is going up dramatically across the board. Affordability issues, rent increases, and another inflationary pressure. So, tenants are already feeling the squeeze, as is everyone. It's not just tenants, though, by the way. Landlords will be feeling the squeeze as well. And I think, again, there is a perception amongst certain elements of the political elite who think that all landlords are incredibly wealthy people who have got pots of money lying around the place, who basically can be afford to be taxed within an inch of their lives. We're all sort of kind of sitting on the beach in the Caribbean or on our yachts somewhere sipping pina coladas. Well, we know that that's not true. A large percentage of the people who invest into PRS are just normal, everyday folk, just trying to do the best they can. And, and for the best on the whole for their tenants. I genuinely believe that. But, there is this, again, goes back to what I said earlier, the perception of what landlords are versus the reality is incredibly different. And again, this document is very much aimed at the tenants taking control. So there's talk about tenants unions. They're talking about bringing in a sort of tenant panel, a tenant participation panel. It's all being led by tenants, and it's being driven, dare I say it, by, I'm sure, people like Shelter and all the rest of it. And my question there again is, where are the landlords' voices in this? We can take part in the consultation, but it appears that and they do say, with engagement from landlords, they make sure that it's written into the text. How much of that is actually going to be listened to? I think there's a question around that. But I've made a note here saying, landlords, it should be every stakeholder should be involved in this process. And it appears that it's more important the tenants' views than anyone else's.
And talking about tenants and the feedback that we get from tenants, I mean, I'm quite active on social media, right? And I get a lot of, I call it landlord hate, because people come on, they say, can't believe you're charging that amount of rent for that flat, money grabbing bastard, all the rest of it, all the abuse that you could get. But it's interesting because we were talking about, market supply and demand, market forces. Like, a lot of tenants believe that this shouldn't be a market.
I agree.
That having a roof over your head is a fundamental human right, which obviously it is, but landlords should not be profiting, etc. And my argument was that you've got, if a tenant decides not to pay rent, like you wouldn't be accepted if it was like you walked in to get your groceries in Tesco or something like that, and you walked out with 2 carrier bags full of shopping, which is another fundamental human right to be able to eat. That would be a criminal offence. Do you know what I mean? Walking out with free shopping.
You're telling me you're not a communist then, Nick?
Exactly. So this is the route it's going. But I feel that this is a huge movement. The feedback that I'm getting from like these young people on social media, this is turning into a communist state, basically. It feels like
Well,
it.
I'll give you an example of a recent, well, not that recent an experience. I was in the office one day at work, and there was a sort of the buzzer where a group of people came into the office. There were 4 of them, I think. One of them was my tenant, one of our tenants, and there were 3 others who were part of whatever they call themselves, affordable rent or generation rent, whatever it was. Anyway, demanding, not hadn't made an appointment or they hadn't rung us up or anything, demanding to speak to someone about the fact that their tenant had been treated grossly unfairly about various issues. Now, they marched into the meeting room. 4 of them sat down in front of on the meeting room table, and I sat down in front of them. And the first thing I said is, are you deliberately trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Make me feel small or whatever. Because firstly, I don't think that my tenant or the tenant needs 4 people or 3 people to help support us through this. Are you just deliberately trying? Anyway, to cut
intimidating you, basically.
Yeah, intimidation. And I said, look, I've been involved in this business for a very long time. And by the way, it's not going to work if that's what you want. And they went, oh, no, of course not, because so-and-so needs to take notes and whatever. Anyway, to cut a long story short, the information that had been provided to them wasn't whole. It wasn't all of the information. It was certain bits of the information. And it was relating to some repairs within a property that were being undertaken, but there were other issues around it, with some communal repairs and so on and so forth. But the tenant kicked up an almighty fuss and basically made out that she had been treated really, really badly. And to cut a long story short, we had conversations with him. We engaged with them because I think it is the right thing to do. We should. But even after that, we were sending emails, copying them in, and the tenant was sending us emails and not copying them in. Because when it suited her to copy them in, she would copy in. And so what I said to our property management team, I said, by the way, when that happens, send the email that she has sent as well, because it is not fair that they're not getting the full picture here. So, I do have an issue with this idea that all that, tenants are always hard done by. The majority of tenants actually are fine and they live within the properties perfectly comfortably. I let properties for years myself. So yeah, I do agree, I think, Nick. I mean, there is a tendency now in the press, in the media, that tenants are hard done by somehow. And I don't want to sound like I'm being uncaring and all the rest of it, because I'm not. As I said, I'm genuinely proud of the style of properties that I provide. But you know what? It is a kind of one-sided argument. And I think one of the things we as landlords should do, and I've been saying this for some time, we need to change the narrative. We shouldn't be seen to be, there's a lot of talk on social media about, look at the rent I've got, look at the yield I'm getting, this, that, and all the rest of it. It's all talking about the money. Can we not veer away from that a wee bit? And as I said, I do believe you can invest in property and provide really good quality homes and at the same time make a return. But let's not keep focusing and banging on about the money. Talk about something else. Talk about the fact that we're providing homes. We could be part of the solution. Let's engage in the process. Let's not be seen to be the enemy.
It's interesting points. I guess that, to attract investment as well, though, we need to talk about the numbers, and, that's the argument.
I get that. I absolutely get that. And, but I think there is an overly focus on that. And some individuals seem to be very tempted or enjoy posting on social media, looking at me, I smashed it. It's all massive. This type of thing. I don't think it does us any favors.
What I find really interesting is that a lot of the people, the kind of new people that get involved in property, and it's like, a lot of it is the social media and what they're the big things that they're doing in property is they never call themselves landlords. They don't, like, landlord is a dirty word, a dirty term. They want to call themselves, it's always investors, property investors. Do you know what I mean? But the bottom line is you're your end customer is the tenant. You are the landlord, and that's how you make money.
Landlord, yeah. I mean, why is landlord a dirty word? I'm proud to be a landlord. I've always been, landlord. It's a perfectly acceptable term. But yeah, as you say, it seems to be that you can't use that term.
Well, what's interesting is coming out. I think this is coming out of England that the word tenant is going to be the next term to be banned. You're not allowed to use the word tenant anymore.
So what is it? What are they going to be?
Occupier. Because I don't know what this is all about. I heard this on an English forum, but anyway, listen, Charlie, it's been absolutely brilliant. We've gone down a lot of rabbit holes here. I mean, I think me and you could probably talk for another hour about this sort of stuff. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. And where can people reach out to you?
I mean, I'm not a massive social media star. I'm not an influencer. I'm not on well, I think I am on Instagram, but I don't rarely use it. I mean, my main source would be LinkedIn. I'm afraid Facebook. I am on Facebook, but I pretty much only use Facebook for friends and family. So if people want to reach out to me, please do it on LinkedIn. If you want to message me on Facebook, more than happy to exchange messages. But if I'm going to get hundreds of Facebook friend requests, I'm afraid I'm probably not going to accept those. But yeah, I mean, I'm always keen to meet with people and have a coffee. One thing just to finish off, Nick, I really do admire people that want to get into the property business. I think it does give you good returns. Let's be realistic here, yeah. And it still does, and it is still possible to do it if you do it properly. And the number of people I see that get into this business that really have absolutely no idea, not just about the legislation, but basics like working out a net and a gross yield, understanding these things. I'm always happy to speak to people. I'm not going to try and take anyone's credit card. I'm not selling any courses yet. But people want to meet for a coffee, have a chat, just have a chat about anything, having a chat about I do believe the sharing of ideas and the sharing of information is so important. And historically, many years ago, I was involved what was known as the Private Rented Sector Forum in Edinburgh with John Blackwood. Before he set up SAL, I remember John and I used to sit on this thing. And, it was positive engagement from Edinburgh City Council at that time. But there was a tendency for people like letting agencies never to speak to each other. You used to go into a room and there would be one at each end. And it was this view that you couldn't speak to another person because you couldn't speak, you're going to give away the trade secrets. Well, you're not, and I think we were guilty to a degree with a lot of this legislation that came in, things like tenancy deposit schemes, which again, I think is a good thing. But there was no engagement at all with it, really. It was like, oh, well, I might speak to someone, but I don't want to speak to another letting agency about it because, we're better together in terms of, putting to, as a group than individually. And that means private landlords, letting agents, people that work in the industry, absolutely. And tenants, I'm happy to speak to tenants. Why not? Or occupiers. Yeah. Let's all get together and chat. It's good. That's
absolutely. Absolutely. And let's just finish with, buy to let is not dead, because you see this headline as well. And, like you said, let's be part of the solution to these things, and let's contribute and add value, basically.
Yeah. And I think, that's a really important term, actually, Nick, add value. When people talk about doing things to their properties, that for me, spending money, capital expenditure, I'm adding value. I don't understand why people don't see that. I'm probably adding value to the capital element of the property. I'm probably reducing my void times. I may be even able to increase my rent, although let's not get too far on that because we don't know. But I'm adding value. It's not just money disappearing down the drain here, guys. It is an active part of investing. Don't be afraid of it. Embrace it. Get used to it. Run the numbers. Get comfortable with it. Build it into your model. That's the way to do it. Any business, treat it like a business.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Charlie Innes. You've been a pleasure to have on the show. We'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Nick. Cheers.
So I hope you enjoyed that interview with Charlie. I know that being a bit of a geek with landlord and tenant legislation and all the rest of that stuff, I certainly did. We probably could have talked for another hour, but I'm sure you, the listeners, are probably glad that we didn't. As always, guys, book onto one of our in-person networking events all over Scotland. They are available to book your tickets on Eventbrite for £20. So far, we've had some amazing feedback. We're creating really good communities. Everybody's really engaging and then continuing discussions over on our Facebook page as well. We really appreciate the support as always, and we'll speak to you again, hopefully with Stephen next week. Cheers.